This is the San Francisco Bay Area. It has been one of the biggest economic hubs of the world for the last 50 years. In fact, if this region of just 18,000 square kilometers were to be its own country, it would have the 19th largest economy in the world, ahead of countries like Switzerland, Taiwan, Sweden, Belgium, and the United Arab Emirates. The Bay Area has been one of the fastest growing regions in the United States for nearly half a century. But then, something changed. You see, the Bay Area, along with many other cities around the world, are going through drastic times right now that could spell the end of cities as we know them. The year is 1957. A Nobel Prize winner named William Shockley had recently moved to Mountain View, California, and started a company called the Shockley Semiconductor Company. And he started this company because he had come up with an idea to build transistors out of silicon instead of germanium. And that would end up being a revolutionary idea for the time. So the Shockley Semiconductor Company began making the first modern-day transistors that would go on to be used in every computer for the rest of the 20th and 21st century. But there was a problem. William Shockley rubbed a lot of his employees the wrong way, so 8 of these employees left the company and went on to start their own semiconductor company in the area called Fairchild Semiconductor, which was a company based around the exact same technology that William Shockley invented. For years afterwards, employees from the Fairchild Semiconductor Company and Bell Labs continued to innovate in Northern California by inventing the integrated circuit and eventually the microprocessor in 1964. And it was after this invention that the world as we know it and the Bay Area would change forever. You see, after the invention of the microprocessor, tech companies started popping up left and right around the same area in Northern California. For example, Intel and AMD were 2 of the first multi-billion-dollar tech companies to be founded in what is now known as Silicon Valley. Then soon after that, in the early 1970s, 2 20-something guys in the area named Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs heard about this new chip technology in the area. So they started to use these new chips in something that they called the Apple I. And after their startup company called Apple generated an IPO value of $1.3 billion, and after seeing the success of now dozens of massive semiconductor companies in the Bay Area, venture capital and tech companies began spreading throughout the Bay Area in hopes that their startup tech adventure would become the next Intel or Apple. And what followed was one of the craziest economic experiments in history. For example, Oracle was founded in 1977 in Santa Clara, Seagate was founded in 1979 in Cupertino, Adobe was founded in 1982 in Mountain View, Autodesk was founded in 1982 in Mill Valley, Cisco was founded in San Francisco in 1984, McAfee in 1987 Santa Clara, and dozens of other companies were founded in the late 70s and early 80s that are currently worth billions of dollars today. And keep in mind that all of these companies were all located within about 150 kilometers of each other. And as a result of this economic and technological explosion in the area, the city would go on to change forever. You see, as these startup companies like Apple and Cisco grew, they needed to hire more people and pay them well for their highly skilled labor. So the Bay Area in the 1980s saw a massive increase to its average income. But because of this rapid increase in income and a lack of supply of things like residential housing and commercial spaces, the cost of living shot through the roof. In fact, from 1984 to 1990, the median housing cost increased by just under 150%, and this trend was far from over within the Bay Area, because the 1990s issued a new age of tech companies called internet companies, and it was during this time where eBay, PayPal, Google, Facebook, Tesla, Uber, Twitter, and dozens of other companies were founded within this 18,000 square kilometer area. In fact, if you were to look at a list of the largest tech companies in the world, you would see that on any given day, nearly half of them are located within the Bay Area. So because of this giant influx of tech companies, we saw a rapid increase to the cost of living within San Francisco in the Bay Area, and it kept climbing to a point where from the years 1986 up until 2016, Trulia reported that the median price of housing had increased by an astounding 557%. And if that wasn't enough, here is another crazy stat. In the United States today, if you were to earn $192,000 per year as a household, you would be considered amongst the top 5% of income earners in the country. Yet, if you were to make $192,000 per year in San Francisco, you would be considered middle class to maybe upper middle class depending on which region of San Francisco that you live in. If you were to take into account that the median price of a detached house is now just over $1.68 million, then you would see that if you were to make nearly $200,000 per year in the Bay Area, you likely wouldn't be able to get approved for a mortgage to purchase an average home because a $200,000 a year income is just not high enough to buy an average house in San Francisco. In fact, in 2019, the average rent for a one-bedroom, 500 square foot condo in San Francisco was a whopping $3,600 per month. But that was last year, and this is today. You see, in the last 6 months, the average one-bedroom rental has dropped by an astounding 11.8% in San Francisco and is continuing to fall. We have also seen residential vacancy rates jump from 3.9% to 6.2%, and commercial vacancy rates go from 5.4% to 9.8%. And what this all means is that San Francisco, for the first time in its history, is seeing people and businesses leave the city. And there are several reasons as to why this is. The first of which is that companies like Facebook, Twitter, Square, Slack, and Google all announced that they would allow for many of their employees to work from home for at least 1 year and potentially forever going forward. The second reason is that one of the attractive things about living in a city like San Francisco is that it always has tons of events going on, lots of places to go, and many shops that you can walk around to within a few minutes of your residence. But after the lockdowns, many of those things have disappeared virtually overnight. And lastly, the cost of living combined with the previous reasons has made many city dwellers rethink about where they want to live. So remember how I said that the average home in San Francisco costs about $1.68 million? Well, if you were to drive just about an hour and 20 minutes north of San Francisco to Sacramento, you would find that the average home price is a much more affordable $395,000. And because of this affordability, Sacramento has actually seen a real estate boom in the last 6 months. And all this means is that many of the workers that are now able to work from home are choosing to leave the expensive cities that they live in order to live a more affordable lifestyle. I mean, that same household that makes $192,000 a year in San Francisco could potentially buy a mansion in Sacramento, or they could just buy an average home in Sacramento and pay it off in about 4 years. So while San Francisco real estate prices have dropped over the last 6 months, areas outside of San Francisco have actually seen their real estate prices increase by a whopping 4.8%. And this trend isn't just being seen in San Francisco. It is being seen throughout many cities in the United States and the world. I mean, New York City saw its average sale price fall by a whopping 17.7% since February. Downtown Los Angeles has seen only a 2.5% drop in real estate prices, but it also experienced a 42% drop in the amount of condo sales compared to this time last year, and cities about an hour outside of Toronto have seen a whopping 40% increase in home sales compared to this time last year. Essentially, many middle to upper middle class individuals are working from home now and are choosing to get a 2,000 square foot house in the suburbs with a $1,600 mortgage rather than paying $2,000 in rent for a 900 square foot condo in the city. But it's just not the middle class that is leaving, it is also the top income earners in the world as well. You see, when you have money and live in a high-tax, densely populated state like California or New York, and your entire state gets locked down, then you might start to think about moving. And that is what is happening across the world. In fact, the fastest growing real estate market in both the UK and the United States is for homes that are priced above $6.5 million. Now, on the surface, this might sound like it would only have a mild effect on cities, but the ramifications might be much larger than you think. I mean, how do you think a city funds its municipal programs like garbage collection, roadwork, policing, and firefighting? Well, it's not from state or federal income taxes. It is actually from property taxes. Depending on the city, up to 60% of total municipal revenue will come from property taxes, with most of the rest of the revenue coming from things like gas taxes, fines, licensing fees, permit fees, and transfers from state governments. But all in all, property taxes are the most important source of revenue for almost every city in the United States. But now that people are moving out of some cities, more residences are becoming vacant or abandoned, which is leading to a decrease in property values and lower tax revenues. And this is one of the key things that we are beginning to see right now. Cities are running out of money because of the lack of property taxes being paid. Now, this is partially because less people are paying taxes this year than ever before, and partially because there is less tax revenue to collect in the first place. And so, how much trouble are cities in right now? Well, let's put it this way. Recently, there was a $1 trillion bailout proposed that would solely go towards both state and local governments. And if this financial assistance does not arrive from municipal governments, then we could see potentially the largest influx of municipal bankruptcies in history. Since 1938, only 700 cities have declared bankruptcy. That's only about 9 per year. But right now, there are dozens of cities on the brink of bankruptcy and dozens of others that are in very bad financial shape and could face bankruptcy within the next 2 years. So that's why almost every single city in the United States right now is essentially compiling debt to pay off debt. So that's why companies like BlackRock have reported record levels of municipal bonds across many cities in the United States, or in other words, municipal governments are taking out record levels of debt in order to help pay for their current debt and other expenses. And the trouble is, a lot of these cities already had large amounts of debt that they cannot now pay back due to the decrease in tax revenues. So that's why in the United States, we have seen the highest level of municipal debt defaults since the financial crisis. And 2 of the top 7 most indebted cities in the United States are, you guessed it, San Francisco and New York. The 2 cities experiencing arguably the biggest population impact from the lockdowns. So it is possible that the combination of debt, the mass exodus of the population, and a lack of jobs might all amount to the collapse of the modern city as we know it. And all we have to do to see what will happen in the future is to look to the past. You see, a city like Detroit went from being the 4th largest city in the United States in the first half of the 20th century to being the 24th largest city today, with a population that is still declining year after year. And even though the fall of Detroit is under very different circumstances, very large contributing factors were a lack of jobs, city debt, and a declining population. All things that are facing modern cities today. Now, I am not saying that New York or San Francisco will turn into Detroit, but it is possible that we might be seeing the first signs of a significant economic problem for these giant cities. I mean, there is a decent possibility that with the advancements in technology, people may not want to live in cities for much longer. For example, one of the main reasons why cities were created in the first place was because that's where the resources and the jobs were. I mean, it wasn't until a few hundred years ago that cities were built solely because they were next to a fresh water source and fertile land. But with the expansion of water supplies, food distribution, electrical grids, and infrastructure, we saw an expansion to the suburbs throughout the 20th century. But during that time, keep in mind, people still had to commute to work, meaning that they would still have to live close to or near a city if they wanted a decent job. But now, with more and more workers being able to work from home permanently, people are now no longer bound to living within a 1.5 hour commute to work. And this trend might continue going forward. I mean, a recent study from CNBC and SurveyMonkey showed that most people are happier working from home than they are commuting to work every day. However, it is worth noting that most of the respondents are happier working from home, but ideally would like to go into the office sometimes, and they also reported that a lot of their work is harder when they are not in an office setting. It's also worth noting that as technology keeps advancing, it might become more common for people to move out of cities. I mean, proportionally, the tech sector is employing a larger percentage of the workforce every year, meaning that working from home will likely become easier for most people going forward. And if you want to look decades into the future, we might see technologies like AI and robotics replace a lot of the jobs where you actually need to go into work today. But that will be a story for another video. But there is another viewpoint about this migration out of cities. Some people say that this is just a minor blip where people are leaving cities simply because of the pandemic, but will likely return once the virus is relatively under control, potentially sometime in 2021. And some people just simply like living in cities. I mean, there are a lot of people that truly don't like living a suburban or a rural comfortable lifestyle and want to be in a city no matter how expensive it may be. And what's also interesting is that not every single city is facing this problem. It seems to really only be the ones with an obscene cost of living that are seeing this mass exodus. But meanwhile, cities like Dallas, Austin, Seattle, Phoenix have not experienced the same problems as much as the most expensive cities in the United States. So it is quite possible that only some of these cities will be affected in the long term, and this just might be an outlier year in regards to where people live. Or this could be the beginning of the end of the modern city as we know it. Only time will tell. So what do you think about the future of cities going forward? Let me know in the comments down below. And also please subscribe and hit that notification bell if you want to see my next video, which should be out in the next few days. Also feel free to check out my documentaries playlist as I have a ton of other videos just like this on there. So please click on my next video and I will see you guys in just a few seconds.